By the way, a few words about girlfriends. Thanks to a spaceflight, another space tourist, Charles Simonyi, succeeded in marrying a millionaire's daughter, famous Swedish model Lisa Persdotter. Charles Simonyi is almost a Soviet man. He was born and grew up in socialist Hungary and was dreaming about space since he was a kid.
This was in the 60s when I was still going to school, and I was very interested in space, like kids are, and I've learned everything about space. I've learned the names of all the dogs from Laika.
Hungarian schoolboy Charles Simonyi was a real champ at space-related subjects. At 13, he won a school astronomy contest and was awarded a trip to the Soviet Union as the main prize. Moscow amazed Charles Simonyi. He got on a rocket-shaped bus that conveyed him throughout the city streets. He was even allowed to touch the first spacesuit with his own hands. But later something almost impossible happened. A children's concert at a TV studio in Shambalovka dedicated to the Cosmonautics Day. That is a film miraculously remained intact, which displays young Charles Simonyi among other pupils. After that, the main thing took place. Charles met one of the most legendary people at the time, one of the first Soviet cosmonauts, Pavel Popovich.
I was telling my brother that I always wanted to touch something that was in space. And at that time, you couldn't go into museums or to see anything connected with space. And really, Pavel Popovich was when I shook hands with him.
In several years, Charles Simonyi would head overseas to the USA, penniless, with nothing but a student's visa in his pocket. In 1981, together with another poor student named Bill Gates, he would create a computer company, Microsoft. It's under his guidance that would be developed the software Word and Excel, presently known to all PC users around the world. On April 7, 2007, Simonyi became the 5th space tourist and the 2nd Hungarian who reached the orbit. When this computer genius was taken out of the descent module, he would decide at any rate to find that very Russian cosmonaut whose appearance in Charles's early years had changed his life forever. They would meet again half a century later. Pavel Popovich could hardly recognize in adult Charles the Hungarian pupil he saw only once. There were thousands of similar encounters in a renowned cosmonaut's life, to say the least. But still, Pavel Popovich was very glad.
I think that
they would share a 30-minute conversation and then part, having wished each other good luck. Later, Charles would fly to space again, whereas Pavel Popovich on September 29, 2009, would depart this world just a few hours before the Soyuz spacecraft was launched, carrying the space tourist aboard. Russian riot in Texas. Russian cosmonauts are committing sabotage against the program of international space cooperation. In spring 2001, NASA was trying the darndest to prevent Dennis Tito's spaceflight. When the Russian cosmonauts' crew slammed out of the American Space Center, a real hysterics broke out, spreading gradually throughout the American media. The Russian cosmonaut strike in Houston became a breaking news topic of world-leading TV channels. Talgat Musabayev and Yuri Baturin came to know it at the restaurant. There were TV sets all around broadcasting something like breaking news. The Russian crew refused to fulfill NASA demands and won a hunger strike. Meanwhile, we're sitting there and stuffing our stomachs. On the one hand, that particular news the Russian crew had heard at dinner was beyond any criticism. Russian cosmonauts are not able to strike as they have nothing to do with the NASA personnel. Nevertheless, the broadcast words turned into a real threat to Dennis Tito, an American subject and a NASA engineer in the past.
Tito вообще очень с подозрением относился.
Tito rather suspiciously treated not only NASA representatives, but US officials in general, as he knew undoubtedly that NASA was surely against him. There was always a bodyguard by his side. He was constantly awaiting some provocations. As far as I can remember, he dreaded some assault and even expected his arm to be broken on purpose. Piece of cake, and the question would stand no longer at all. In fact, someone on the phone in a hotel room did really promise Tito to crash his bones down in a dark side street in case he didn't leave that stupid idea of a spaceflight. Dennis took it as seriously as to when there are huge sums and the reputation of the world's two main space powers at stake, a single individual's life no longer enjoys such a significant value. There was a whole escort of limousines and Lincolns accompanying Tito, with a whole bunch of heavily armed security guards on the lookout. Meanwhile, NASA administrator Daniel Goldin gave Moscow an ultimatum.
I
remember it perfectly. At that time, we were in the United States on training. When the scandal flared up, Mr. Goldin, the NASA administrator, said that either Dennis doesn't fly up or we abandon the program. It was formulated that tough. The Americans insisted that a tourist aboard the ISS would distract the crew from the implementation of difficult operations, and in case of emergency, his presence would be a death-defying threat. Thus, it would imperil the whole International Space Project in general. The crew commander expressed an essentially different opinion on the matter. I'm telling you now, and I did the same thing then, that our crew was so well prepared and so accurately coordinated that it's all the same to us if there is a space tourist or a suitcase on board the ship. The whole world expected the final scene of the scandal, wondering if the Russians would send the tourist into space or step back. Though Moscow was not empowered to make arrangements at the American Space Center, the reason why Russian cosmonauts were ordered to proceed to trainings in Houston without Dennis. The dream of Tito's whole life was collapsing. It said that those sentenced to death experienced their lifetime flashback. Something of that kind occurred to Dennis. On October 4, 1957, in Queens, a New York City district inhabited by immigrants, a 16-year-old waiter of an ice cream parlor was listening spellbound to the radio and charmed dropped a tray with plates. Broken dishes cost was equal to his daily wages. The young man was thrifty and tried to save up some money for studies, but he was almost indifferent to what had happened. It was nothing, as he was entirely grasped with the news transmitted by the radio. The USSR placed in orbit the first artificial satellite of Earth. The guy's name was Dennis Tito. Later on, he would call the 4th of October the birthday of his dream. In 2001, an offspring of Italian immigrants, a sweet toffee saleswoman from Queens and a printer's employee, bought a space trip for $20 million. Suddenly, there emerges NASA, an insurmountable obstacle which bars the way of fulfilling his dream. The first space tourist was forced to defeat an external adversary. The seventh one, Guy Laliberté, has to push his own limits. In this particular situation, Guy Laliberté is developing his endurance, which Guy boasts in abundance. 25 years ago, he started from the ground up and managed to build his own circus empire brick by brick.
Just starting Cirque du Soleil was a big mountain to climb. We were a bunch of kids, in the early 20s. The only experience we had was the experience of life we had. We had no management or big business expertise.
Sometimes he had to face some bitter truths. For instance, that it's hard to match a fine dream about circus with hungry children.
Many times we thought that we will not survive the next day, business-wise.
One day, Guy wavered and turned off the traced road. Fed up with fighting against the need he lived in and searching for regular earnings, Guy got a job on a hydropower plant. It was dull enough, but Guy was sure from now on his kids would not go to bed hungry. Despite tidy sums of money, I had to quit due to a strike. Looking at Guy making grimaces, his lively facial expressions, it may seem that he's not able to be serious at all. In fact, it is nothing but a disguise behind which there is hidden an iron-willed personality and a true toiler. A story of hard living, with certain variations included, can be told about any of the 7 space tourists. But perhaps the most peculiar fate was granted to the 6th one. Richard Garriott, American astronaut Owen Garriott's son, did not manage to step into his father's shoes since he was forbidden to become an astronaut by doctors.
Ability to get into space myself for almost 30 years, ever since I was very young, and my father was an astronaut, but NASA told me as a child that because of my poor eyesight, I would never be selected as an astronaut.
Richard's family used to live in a NASA cottage settlement where virtually every second man was an astronaut. Space was the common subject of home chats. At night, the boy had eaten his heart out not to burst into tears. He knew he'd never be as much of a hero as Dad and his mates. Richard wanted to lift off from the ground so badly that he was ready to give his life for that dream.
Since I was a young child, I have commonly said that if the director of NASA were to come knock on my door and say, there is a ship leaving Earth today, it will never return, and you do not get to say goodbye to anyone you know, you have to leave right now, I would go.
Luckily, he didn't have to sacrifice his life. One day, Garriott Jr. was stricken with a brilliant idea. If he can't head to the real space, then he can invent a toy-like one. Then Richard gathered 1 million of like-minded dreamers, and they went together into a virtual space journey.
In this game, this is referred to as a massively multiplayer online game. And what that means is that everyone who buys and plays this game plays together at the same time in a vast virtual world that we have created.
Computer games with a space plot brought Richard a fortune and made a starlit road unfold before his eyes.
And in fact, it does relate to my father a bit, in that I sent this actual necklace, one of the few times I've ever had it off of my neck, was to send it up on Space Lab, the 9th launch of the shuttle, for a month in space. And so even though this would be my first time into space, my father already took this for me into space back in 1984.
On October 12, 2008, one of the most successful computer designers and games creators, the 6th space tourist Richard Garriott, fulfilled his infantile oath. Garriott the father worried about his son more than anybody else. Actually, his heir did step into his shoes and became the first American astronaut in 2nd generation. Finally, the descent module touched the ground. Landing was a success, a long-awaited encounter. "Well done, son," said Owen Garriott, the astronaut, to his son Richard Garriott, the cosmonaut. "I am proud of you." "Thank you, Dad."